Picture a frozen world where Mother Nature engineered absolute nightmares, beasts armed with flesh-shredding hooks, jaw-dropping fangs, and a relentless, hardwired drive to slaughter everything in their path. Sure, the modern African savanna has its fair share of scary hunters, but honestly, they look like harmless house pets compared to the titans of the Pleistocene, completely dwarfed in both sheer bulk and deadly biological weaponry. These ancient kings completely dominated the harshest, most punishing environments our planet ever threw at them, and today, we are taking a wild ride back in time to uncover exactly how they survived, hunted, and ultimately vanished into the shadows. First up on our prehistoric hit list, the Scimitar-toothed cat. Stepping onto the desolate, freezing tundra, this elusive assassin has spent centuries wrapped in scientific mystery and wild legends. It is a literal phantom that haunts the fossil records and keeps paleontologists up at night, a ruthless executioner of the ancient world. Forget the Hollywood-famous Smilodon for a second. This cousin belonged to a darker, vastly underappreciated family tree that was every bit as terrifying. We are talking about an unstoppable, cold-blooded Arctic killer. Officially known as Homotherium, this beast was no ordinary, oversized tiger or run-of-the-mill prehistoric lion. It was evolution's ultimate science experiment, a completely unique branch of life forged to conquer a relentlessly unforgiving wasteland. Built incredibly lean compared to its heavyweight relatives, it rocked extended, muscular legs designed for high-speed, marathon-level pursuits instead of lazy bushwhacking. Most people picture these iconic felines hiding in the brush with comically massive fangs, but that was absolutely not the case here. This particular hunter brought a bone-chilling level of brutal, streamlined efficiency to the frozen plains. Sporting slightly shorter, brutally thick teeth, it specialized in delivering rapid, devastatingly deep lacerations to bleed out its victims in seconds. What was on the menu? Try picking off massive, towering mammoth calves alongside incredibly fast, untamed equines, bizarre ancient camels, and the absolute heavyweights of the megafauna world. Yet, this was not just some mindless killing machine relying purely on brute force. Bone records drop a massive bombshell. They ran in gangs. We have actually found skeletons bearing perfectly healed, catastrophic injuries, a miraculous recovery that is a flat-out death sentence for any lone wolf. That kind of survival screams pack loyalty, complex pecking orders, and intense, coordinated teamwork to keep their wounded alive. Are we staring at the ghost of a hyper-intelligent, tactical supercat that plotted its strikes with military precision? You bet. And their turf was absolutely legendary, stretching across a mind-blowing expanse from European steppes to the wild Americas and spanning right across Asia and Africa. They were the ultimate globe-trotting apex predators. Every deadly ecosystem threw unique curveballs, and the Homotherium tackled them head-on. Some splinter groups morphed their biology to have stouter legs, while others grew massive nasal passages to suck in the freezing, sub-zero air without freezing their lungs. Their anatomy was an absolute masterclass in survival mechanics, towering right around 3.9 feet at the shoulders and packing anywhere from 440 to 880 pounds of pure muscle. It was the ultimate fusion of deadly acrobatics and raw devastation. Those massive front limbs acted like hydraulic presses to pin down thrashing giants, while hidden, razor-honed claws sliced through thick hide like hot knives through butter. Top that off with specialized night vision eyes that turned pitch-black landscapes into a glowing map of moving targets, making it the ultimate dusk-to-dawn terror. For a staggering 4 million years, this scimitar-wielding warlord wore the crown. It stared down wild global meltdowns, shifting tectonic plates, and even the dawn of tool-wielding humans. But, as with every great dynasty, the clock eventually ran out. When the ice finally retreated, its kingdom crumbled into chaos. The giant meals vanished into thin air, the hunting grounds evaporated, and desperate rivals fought mercilessly for whatever scraps were left. Next up, the Marsupial Lion. Spoiler alert, absolutely not a real lion, but it definitely slaughtered with the exact same terrifying ferocity. Despite having literally zero feline DNA, this evolutionary mutant wielded flesh-tearing hooks and a skull-crushing grip that would make today's savanna kings run for cover. We are talking about the undisputed heavyweight champion of flesh-eating pouched mammals, Thylacoleo carnifex. Close your eyes and picture the harsh Australian outback tens of thousands of years ago, an incredibly savage frontier completely overrun by colossal, freakish beasts. Hulking, impossible monstrosities that you will only ever find locked away in dusty paleontology textbooks today. Imagine encountering kangaroos as massive as thoroughbred horses, or wombats so ridiculously dense they hit the scales like a compact car. And stalking these titans? A freak of nature that shattered every biological rule, packing a jaw-clamping force that absolutely humiliated modern big cats. Now, here is the craziest part. This monster did not come from a long, proud bloodline of apex killers. In a wild evolutionary twist, its great-grandparents were literally plant-munching pacifists. It shares way more DNA with your favorite sleepy koala than any jungle predator. But the brutal laws of nature mutated this gentle lineage into an ultimate, flesh-rending weapon. What crawled out of that evolutionary crucible was a downright bizarre anomaly, operating with a completely alien, yet devastatingly effective, blueprint for murder. Stretching out to roughly 4.9 feet and tipping the scales at a staggering 353 pounds, it was a terrifying cocktail of brute force, lightning reflexes, and cold, calculating smarts. Its thick, bulldog-like skull was practically bursting at the seams with wildly mutated, hyper-dense chewing muscles. If the scientific models hold up, pound for pound, this outback nightmare possessed the single most destructive bite ever recorded in the history of predatory land mammals. It could shatter solid bone and drop massive prey in the absolute blink of an eye. But trust me, those jaws were just the beginning of its terrifying arsenal. Picture this. Absolute Unit's front legs bulging with pure muscle and armed with retractable claws, something you almost never see in marsupials, plus freaky opposable thumbs to grapple you. Those meat hooks weren't just for show. They were literal switchblades designed to slice through muscle and lock their prey down during a terrifying sneak attack. One perfectly timed jump, one fatal bear hug, and it was game over for whatever crossed its path. The savage world it lived in forged its brutal tactics, turning this pouched powerhouse into a phantom stalking through the thickets and pitch-black caverns. It was dead quiet, terrifyingly patient, and utterly lethal, and looking at cave fossils, we know it probably hauled its kills straight into the dark to feast without dealing with pesky scavengers. Over time, those cavernous hideouts transformed into literal boneyards, creepy, silent monuments to just how unstoppable this hunter really was. Now, don't let the name fool you. The Thylacoleo had zero family ties to the majestic cats roaming Africa today, but it claimed the exact same throne, reigning as the undisputed boss and striking absolute terror into the hearts of Australia's colossal megafauna. If you break down its scientific name, you get meat-eating pouched lion, a wild moniker that perfectly captures just how gloriously weird and terrifying its evolutionary journey actually was. You see, for millions of years, Australia was nature's ultimate isolation tank, drifting away from the rest of the world and taking a totally bizarre cast of creatures along for the ride. While the rest of the globe got typical hoofed beasts and big cats, down under, the marsupials stepped up to the plate, morphing in absolutely mind-blowing ways. The Thylacoleo was basically Mother Nature going rogue, designing a custom-built killing machine for a savage island totally isolated from conventional predators. Eventually, though, the final, blood-curdling shriek of this pouched terror faded into the mists of prehistory. Or did it? The very first humans to arrive might have actually heard those roars, painting mysterious cave murals of nightmarish beasts rocking heavy claws and pouches. Silhouettes that match right up with what we now know was this legendary beast. But hold on to your seats, because we are crossing the globe to meet another monster. Imagine the brutal, bone-chilling freeze of the Ice Age blizzards, hammering the North American tundra, and towering over it all, an absolute titan ruling the frozen wasteland. Meet the short-faced bear, scientifically dubbed Arctodus simus, and trust me, this was no fluffy forest crawler. Popping up on its hind legs, it towered over 11.5 feet tall and tipped the scales at a staggering 2,200 pounds, easily making it the most massive land carnivore of its era. It gets its name from a seriously freaky skull structure, a stubby, extra-wide snout that looked totally out of place on such a gigantic, hulking frame. But that weird face? It wasn't just for looks. It was the housing for an insanely destructive set of jaws that could snap thick femurs like they were dry twigs. Its entire anatomy was a masterclass in survival. It sported ridiculously long, jacked legs, meaning this behemoth could flat-out sprint. Forget what you know about today's grizzlies. This nightmare didn't waste time climbing trees or just wrestling things to the ground. No, it was all about relentless speed and crazy stamina, a pure, untamed, heat-seeking missile-blending brawn, swiftness, and chilling brain power. The ultimate apex ruler of the deep freeze. But here's the kicker. It didn't just survive by chasing things down. Hard science tells us it was a total mob boss of the tundra, aggressively hijacking kills from anyone else lucky enough to score a meal. In a savage sub-zero world where every single bite meant life or death, it would swagger up, flex its colossal bulk, and completely bully lesser hunters away from their hard-earned dinners. Just one look at this towering wall of fur and muscle was enough to send rival carnivores running for the hills. When food was everywhere, it was the undeniable king. Yet when those brutal winters refused to end and the massive herds vanished south, this giant plunged into a desperate fight for survival. Even through the starvation and the freeze, its terrifying footprint defined an entire epoch of Earth's history. We're talking bones scattered from the icy reaches of Alaska all the way down to the swamps of Florida, mapping out a legendary conquest of the continent. And inside certain gloomy caverns, you'll find its massive skeleton resting right beside the campfires of the very first humans. A creepy, silent clue that this beast's final downfall wouldn't be starvation, but a clash with a brand new, tool-wielding rival. But the world was fighting back, too. The planet heated up, those endless glaciers melted away, thick forests exploded across the land, and the wide-open hunting grounds literally vanished beneath its paws. For a speed demon custom-built to sprint across flat, icy expanses, this sudden shift in the map was an absolute death sentence. Its hunting grounds collapsed, the massive herds dwindled, and just like that, the reign of North America's greatest terror fizzled out. Somewhere between 11,000 and 10,000 years back, this towering giant simply evaporated from existence, leaving behind zero offspring and no living witnesses to recount its fury. Yet, those massive bones locked in the permafrost are still spilling epic secrets to scientists today. And then, there was the ultimate icon of the Ice Age, the saber-toothed cat. Back when the planet was busy forging absolute monsters, one breathtaking assassin prowled the frozen plains, deep woods, and massive glaciers like it owned the place. Sure, it was a cat, but nothing like the ones purring on your couch. Every coiled muscle in its body screamed raw, explosive power ready to detonate. But the real stars of the show? Those teeth, massive, wicked curves of razor-sharp ivory that looked like they were hammered out by a legendary god of war. We know it as Smilodon, the legendary Saber-tooth, reigning as the undisputed, bloodthirsty royalty of the Pleistocene epoch. In a savage time where titans of the animal kingdom fought and died, these big cats weren't just hunting for a meal, they were executing terrifying masterclasses in survival. Think of them as nature's ultimate killing machines, forged through millennia of ice and blood to conquer an absolutely ruthless, unpredictable world. Those iconic fangs? They were not just for show. Imagine twin hunting knives strapped to a predator's jaw, precision-engineered weapons designed to slice through thick flesh and end lives in a heartbeat. But wielding that kind of biological firepower, well, it came with a heavy tax. To handle the extreme stress of those colossal fangs, the Smilodon's skull and neck muscles had to be built like a tank, completely packed with explosive power. Forget what you know about modern lions that choke the life out of their meals. This apex predator was an assassin, striking with terrifying surgical accuracy to slash right through veins, windpipes, and soft spots. A single blur of motion, one devastating strike, and a prehistoric giant would crash to the frozen earth. So, where exactly did these massive beasts come from? The family tree of the saber-toothed cat is an ancient, wild, and mind-blowing journey. Way before the famous Smilodon stepped onto the scene, a whole lineage of dagger-toothed felines had already spent millions of years carving a path of destruction across entirely different continents and climates. It is a killer design that nature literally invented, scrapped, and then brought back from the dead again and again. Why? Because when survival of the fittest hits its absolute peak, nature builds the perfect weapon to answer the call. Those monstrous fangs evolved for one specific reason: to take down absolute titans, think towering mammoths, massive prehistoric bison, and the hulking, elephant-sized giant ground sloths that shook the earth. The ability to drop such unbelievably huge prey turned the saber-toothed cats into a masterclass of evolutionary adaptation. They weren't even all part of the same biological family, yet they all rocked the exact same deadly trademark: gigantic teeth, unbelievable raw power, and a completely terrifying grace. Enter Smilodon fatalis. This legendary ghost of the Ice Age was the undisputed king of North America. Meanwhile, down south, its even beefier cousin, Smilodon populator, was busy tearing up the sprawling plains of South America and defying the limits of nature. Picture a beast packing over 880 pounds of pure, unadulterated muscle and thick bone. It was an absolutely gorgeous nightmare. It stalked like a ghost, completely silent in the tall grass, until boom. It exploded into a chaotic, unstoppable hurricane of slashing claws and sinking fangs. But surviving the Ice Age was practically a death sentence. For a Smilodon, scoring a meal was never, ever guaranteed. Their targets were walking fortresses, highly aggressive, and usually guarded by massive herds. Yet, fossil records hide an absolute shocker. Paleontologists constantly find saber-toothed skulls and bones covered in brutal, shattered fractures that had somehow healed over time. What does that mean? It means these hardcore killers probably formed tight-knit packs and actually looked out for their wounded. If a warrior went down in a hunt, the rest of the pack likely brought them scraps, keeping them alive until they could fight again. Now, let us dive into the freezing waters. Enter the giant otter, an absolute masterclass in stealth and adaptation, darting through the Pleistocene rivers with as much fury as the monsters on land. You heard that right. An otter. But wipe those cute little river puppies right out of your mind. The Ice Age version was heavily armored in muscle, massive, and tough as nails. Forget the relaxing, warm tropical streams we see today. These beasts thrived in completely chaotic, freezing ecosystems, where the bitter cold set the rules, and staying alive meant fighting tooth and nail every single day. Dig sites buried deep in South America, right where modern Brazil and Argentina sit today, paint a wild picture. They unearthed otter skeletons that tipped the scales at well over 66 pounds, stretching out to nearly 6.6 feet in sheer, terrifying length. We are talking about genuine aquatic titans that dwarfed their modern relatives, conquering freezing glacial lakes and raging rapids. They completely owned the flooded plains, going head-to-head in brutal turf wars against massive caimans, predatory terror bears, and even big cats, rocking incredibly dense, freezing waterproof coats, long torpedo-like bodies, and jaw strength that could crack a skull. These giant otters blew expectations out of the water. They were lightning-fast swimmers, remarkably patient stalkers, and most importantly, wicked smart. They mastered their harsh world by carving out complex underground dens to survive the freeze, building secure hideouts, and hunting in highly coordinated tactical squads. Honestly, that pack mentality was their ultimate cheat code for surviving the apocalypse. While the rest of the prehistoric world bet everything on raw muscle or pure speed, these river wolves put all their chips on teamwork. The evidence screamed that they ran in huge, tight-knit families, much like the giant otters roaming the Pantanal today, but surviving against far deadlier odds. Splitting kills, shouting out alarm calls, and actively teaching their pups the art of the hunt created an unbreakable bond that kept their entire bloodline alive. But do not get it twisted, their lives were incredibly dangerous. When you share a neighborhood with lurking saber-toothed assassins and multi-ton ground sloths, even a massive 6.5-foot river predator needs a rock-solid game plan just to see tomorrow. They strategically fortified their dens right into the steepest, most treacherous riverbanks, camouflaging them perfectly inside tangled roots and boulders. The freezing water was their ultimate sanctuary and their deadliest weapon, while their hunting habits kept the entire ecosystem from collapsing. Their brutal diet? Anything they could catch. Massive fish, tough crustaceans, unlucky reptiles, and even water birds were constantly on the menu. Armed with thick, heavy-duty molars, their jaws functioned like industrial vice grips, easily crushing through armor-plated shells and snapping thick bones. They literally squeezed every single ounce of life-saving marrow out of their prey. In those dark, icy waters, they were the undisputed kings of the deep. Picture the freezing, brutal wasteland of the Ice Age out there. One absolute nightmare of a predator completely owned the frozen tundra. The cave hyena. Forget whatever you think you know about modern scavengers, because this massive beast was on a whole different, terrifying level. Think of today's spotted hyena, but supersized, heavily armored by evolution, and built specifically to conquer the most unforgiving, relentless environments on Earth. Their empire was absolutely massive, spanning the entire Eurasian continent from the rolling hills of France all the way into the deepest, most punishing stretches of Siberia. They were ravenous killers, brilliant opportunists, and above everything else, the ultimate prehistoric survivors. Armed with bone-shattering jaws that could pulverize a skeleton with terrifying ease, this creature commanded total fear and ultimate respect. Every inch of its body was weaponized by nature to go toe-to-toe with the colossal titans of the megafauna, and its jagged, lethal teeth left deep scars on ancient bones that you can still see right now. Those scratch marks? They are the quiet, chilling evidence of how this beast brutally ruled the top tier of the prehistoric food web. But here is the craziest part about this terrifying monster. It was incredibly social, operating in massive, highly organized clans with strict ranks, exactly like the apex predators roaming Africa today. These deadly packs operated like well-oiled military units when taking down prey, They fiercely guarded their pups and fought bloody, high-stakes turf wars against apex rivals like the massive cave lion, and yes, even our own fierce cousins, the Neanderthals. The fossil record drops a massive truth bomb about who really owned the caves of Europe because for decades, experts swore those dark caverns belonged solely to ancient humans. Fast forward to today, and modern science has totally flipped that script. Turns out, a huge chunk of those underground fortresses were actually the heavily guarded lairs of cave hyenas. Piles of shattered skeletons, fossilized droppings called coprolites, and savagely chewed remains prove these beasts absolutely dominated those underground strongholds for generations. They were not just stealing prime real estate from early humans, they battled them for every ounce of meat, and if a hominid wandered off alone, well, they instantly became the next item on the menu. Let me tell you, the Ice Age was totally merciless. Show a single ounce of weakness, and you were dead. These brutes were a terrifying double threat, reigning supreme whether they were actively slaughtering prey or aggressively stealing a fresh kill. Their master plan for survival meant aggressively scouting enormous territories for dead meat, while simultaneously launching brutal ambush attacks on wild horses, towering deer, and even pulling off the unthinkable hunting baby mammoths. In a frozen wasteland defined by total starvation, these carnivores hacked the system to capitalize on literally anything that breathed. They endlessly stalked the epic megafauna migrations, shadowing the massive herds of plant eaters like ghosts across the tundra. And when those brutal, bone-chilling blizzards finally hit, they dragged themselves deep underground, creating safe havens to raise their savage little pups far away from the lethal freeze and the jaws of rival killers. Forget the myth that they just ate leftovers. This beast was an elite, top-tier assassin, easily going pound for pound with the most terrifying cats and colossal bears of the era. Their sheer ferocity literally dictated how every other animal lived and breathed, holding the entire frozen ecosystem perfectly in check. Thanks to a wildly reinforced skull and mutant-level jaw muscles, they could easily demolish solid bone that left other predators totally helpless. That gnarly superpower made them the absolute kings of nutrient. Recycling, wiping the landscape completely clean of rotting corpses before toxic plagues could wipe out the tundra. Now, shift your focus to the cave bear. Imagine the dead, eerie silence of the deep ice age. A world buried under towering glaciers where freezing winds slice through the canyons like invisible razor blades. Out of that frozen nightmare, an absolute titan stepped into the light. Enter the cave bear, a creature of pure, raw muscle and terrifying dominance. Packing ridiculously broad shoulders and draped in incredibly thick armor-like fur, it lifted its massive head to sniff the freezing air. This giant confidently roamed a beautifully savage wasteland, navigating a brutal reality where the line between living another day and being completely wiped from existence was razor-thin. Known as one of the most spectacular heavyweights of the Pleistocene megafauna, this mammoth-sized brute mostly munched on prehistoric plants, but it absolutely would not pass up a chance at fresh meat. We are talking about an unstoppable juggernaut weighing well over 2,200 pounds, famous for its mind-blowing ability to conquer any environment. It proudly patrolled the frozen Eurasian steppes and massive ice fields with the unmistakable swagger of an undisputed king. With every single step, its gigantic claws carved massive, terrifying craters into the deep snow, while its hyper-tuned senses could lock onto the faintest scent of an approaching threat or a hidden meal across the blinding white horizon. When the brutal, never-ending winter locked down the planet and the sun was nothing but a weak ghost in a depressing gray sky, these behemoths retreated deep underground. Pitch-black caverns transformed into sacred fortresses, trapping vital body heat as these giant mothers desperately shielded their helpless cubs from the fatal frost. Deep inside those terrifyingly dark tombs, the incredible cycle of life fought back against the extinction-level cold. Expectant mothers slipped into a deep, death-like hibernation, magically growing their unborn babies while rationing every last drop of energy through pure biological genius. When the tiny cubs finally arrived, they were blind, incredibly weak, and completely defenseless. But wrapped in the warmth of their massive mother and thick stone walls, they quickly bulked up on intensely rich, fat-loaded milk. But make no mistake, their very first, high-stakes battle wasn't against a predator. It was just trying to wake up alive from that brutal, freezing slumber. Imagine starving for agonizing months on end, just a desperate mother burning her very life force to shield her newborn cubs from the freezing darkness. By the time they finally dragged themselves out of that pitch-black slumber, a brutal spring was sinking its frost-bitten claws into the tundra, and this savage world, while utterly unforgiving, pulsed with a dangerous new energy. Picture this: massive cave bears stalking like absolute kings across a vast frozen wasteland. These titans carved paths through gnarled pine forests, smashed through half-frozen waterways, and constantly tasted the bitter wind, hunting for buried roots, shriveled berries, or whatever icy scraps this merciless environment left behind. Now, get this, even though they were built like unstoppable tanks, these giants were not out for blood. Evolution had tweaked their massive muzzles to sniff out a meal from miles away, rather than crushing the life out of struggling prey. Sure, their heavy jaws were built to grind down tough vegetation, but those jagged teeth still hid the dark, violent echoes of their meat-eating ancestors. But hold on, the very ground beneath their colossal paws was shifting. Epic ice sheets were breathing in and out like frozen leviathans, tearing up the landscape and pushing every breathing creature to the absolute brink. Mother Nature was ruthlessly pulling the strings, deciding the fate of every single pack and herd. Enter a new apex player, humanity. Our ancient ancestors had just crashed this frozen party, and they were about to flip the fragile dynamic between predator and prey completely upside down. Stumble deep into primordial caverns today, past prehistoric murals dripping with ancient blood and history, and you will find their massive skeletons resting in the dark, quiet ghosts of a forgotten war. To those early tribes, this beast was a living god, terrified and worshipped all at once. You would actually find these colossal skulls and femurs stacked in eerie, deliberate altars, proving our ancestors felt a deep, almost magical connection to these fur-covered titans. Think about the wild stories they must have whispered around the flames. Legends where the Great Bear was not just a beast, but a sacred spirit guide linking the mortal realm to the afterlife, mixing raw, terrifying power with ancient tribal magic. But let us be real, worship does not fill a starving belly. When the ice closed in and resources vanished, humanity marched right into the beast's own sanctuaries. It was a brutal cage match for shelter and survival, and those primitive, fire-hardened spears with razor-sharp stone tips, they started drawing first blood. The undisputed king of the underworld was suddenly on the menu. The slaughter kicked into high gear. We figured out exactly when these Goliaths were knocked out cold in hibernation, ambushing them in their sleep. Utterly ruthless? Absolutely. But it kept us alive. A single kill could fuel an entire clan for days. Their thick grease fueled torches against the dark, while those massive, heavy pelts were the only thing standing between a hunter and a freezing death. Nothing went to waste, not a single scrap. But every time one of these behemoths fell, the clock ticked down on their entire existence. The chaotic weather was not pulling any punches either. Melting ice tore apart their home turf, wiping out their safe havens and crushing their food supply. Cozy dens turned into rare real estate. Meals became a myth. The fight to survive turned into an all-out battle royale. Generation by generation, fewer of these incredible beasts managed to outlast the brutal upheaval of their dying home. And when the very last cave bear vanished into the mist, there was no massive roar of grief. No lightning struck. The earth did not shake. The savage wilderness just kept spinning, utterly indifferent to the tragedy. But man, the void left behind by that absolute unit still sends shockwaves through time. Those ancient, fossilized remains scream an epic saga of supreme dominance ripped apart by a tragic downfall. Flash forward to today, picture scientists in dusty dig sites and gleaming museums, piecing together the ultimate cold case of this fallen king. Ghostly strands of genetic code locked in stone are literally spilling the ancient secrets of how they fought, lived, and evolved, even linking them to the grizzlies and polar bears prowling our planet right now, creatures facing their own terrifying fight for survival. Yet, the legacy goes way deeper than bone and blood. This behemoth smashed through the boundaries of biology to become a permanent icon in our collective nightmares and dreams. It is the ultimate embodiment of raw, dormant power, a literal earth-shaking titan resting in the planet's dark abyss. It became the ultimate sentinel guarding the gateway between our waking reality and the spirit realm. Even though it vanished millennia ago, this phantom still prowls through our darkest dreams, anchoring the epic myths we whisper, while huddled tightly around a crackling fire. Now, brace yourself for this. Imagine a sloth that could shrug off the most brutal winter storms on record. Or another variant packing the earth-shattering bulk of a modern bull elephant. We are even talking about acrobatic sloths scaling cliffs with moves that would put mountain goats to absolute shame. Make no mistake, this frozen era belonged entirely to these mega beasts. In this episode, we are ripping up everything you thought you knew, and revealing prehistoric monsters that make today's sleepy tree huggers look like a total joke. Welcome to the true empire of the sloths. Picture over 60 radically different, heavily armored species dominating an environment pushed to the absolute breaking point. The oceans literally drained away, revealing massive secret highways of dirt and ice that chained entire continents together. Temperatures violently whiplashed from bone-shattering blizzards to sudden warming trends, forging a wild roster of terrifying predators and colossal prey that we are just now piecing together from shattered bones. In this completely ruthless, do-or-die wasteland, these titans did not just squeak by, they utterly conquered, exploding into an insane variety of shapes, unstoppable sizes, and lethal survival tactics. Forget that cute, fuzzy little slowpoke hanging out in a jungle canopy that pops into your head right now. These ancient juggernauts were evolution on steroids. We are talking about elephant-sized behemoths stomping across glacial plains and tearing through frozen forests like they owned the place. Sure, a few still took to the branches, but others transformed into subterranean bulldozers, excavating massive, sprawling bunkers deep beneath the permafrost. Imagine a world where nature went completely berserk. How exactly did this frozen wasteland become the ultimate breeding ground for such absolute towering monsters? Today, their tiny cousins just hang out in trees. But back then, these unbelievable titans ruled the entire American landscape like kings. How did they pull that off? It all boils down to a one-of-a-kind, crazy ecological cocktail. Picture a wild frontier overflowing with untapped food and temporarily missing those specialized superkillers, giving life a free pass to mutate into some seriously bizarre forms. The relentless freezing and thawing of the planet did not just change the weather, it built a chaotic laboratory of life, mashing together lush woodlands and sweeping grassy plains, crashing them right into dusty scrublands and swampy marshes in one epic, shifting landscape. Every single time those colossal glaciers pushed forward or melted back, Mother Nature flipped the game board, forcing these beasts to either level up or die out. And the sloths? They went into full survival mode with jaw-dropping evolutionary upgrades. Some morphed into heavy-duty lawnmowers, devouring endless fields of tough prairie grass. Others bulked up to rip through dense jungle canopies for hidden fruits, their muscles and bones twisting over millennia of brutal natural selection to fit their battle needs. We are talking wicked, scythe-like claws and arms built like massive tree trunks, hooked up to jaws designed to crush whatever was on the menu. But their mind-blowing, mammoth-like size? That was their ultimate survival cheat code. When you are living in a perpetual freezer, being utterly massive is the absolute best way to lock in body heat and keep from freezing to death. Plus, a gigantic frame acts like a walking battery, hoarding critical energy for those grueling, brutal winters when the land turns into a barren wasteland. And let us not forget the terrifying nightmares stalking the shadows if you want to survive a world hunted by lightning-fast, dagger-fanged, saber-toothed cats. And monstrous, bone-crushing, short-faced bears, you better be too ridiculously huge for them to take down. Enter the legendary Snow Sloth. Picture this absolute unit, an armored mountain of fur, drifting like a ghost through the pitch-black, freezing pine forests. Sure, it did not pack flesh-ripping fangs or hunt down prey in a bloodthirsty rage. But this peaceful titan was forged in the harshest fires of evolution, built like a tank to conquer an apocalyptic winter wonderland where only the toughest survive. This majestic snow walker stretched an intimidating 9.8 feet long and tipped the scales at well over 2,200 pounds. Calling it just a big sloth is an insult. It was a walking, breathing monument to the sheer, untamed power of the Pleistocene era. Rocking colossal, hook-like claws, it would effortlessly snap massive branches right off trees and rip straight through the frozen, rock-hard earth to feast on berry roots. But those terrifying meat hooks were not for slaughter. They were the ultimate multi-tools for staying alive in a wasteland, representing a life built entirely around iron-willed grit, strategic caution, and unstoppable endurance. So, how does a distant cousin of those tiny, slow-moving rainforest fluffballs we know today mutate into a winter weather gladiator? Simple. Mother Nature unleashed her most extreme evolutionary upgrades. Forget hanging upside down in a canopy, this beast marched right on the ground, using its towering stature to rip down high-hanging greenery and bulldozing over whole trees just to grab a snack. It literally terraformed the ancient woods as it walked, acting as both a heavy-eating survivor and the ultimate landscaper of its prehistoric kingdom. Its daily grind involved chewing through punishingly tough bark, fibrous brush, and ice-covered roots that would shatter any normal creature's teeth. Deep inside, a monstrous, churning stomach acted like a high-tech fermentation vat, squeezing every drop of life-saving energy out of the scrub, a slow-burn engine powering a deeply stoic giant. Panic? Not in this creature's vocabulary. It totally owned the frozen clock. Stomping through the tundra, either completely solo or in tight little squads, their massive footprints punched deep craters into the permafrost, carving epic trails across glittering ice plains, solid rivers, and dead, silent woodlands. Wrapped in an impenetrable, mammoth-grade fur coat to deflect bone-chilling gales and rocking giant snowshoe-like feet, every single thundering footstep was a calculated masterclass in survival. For an absolute eternity, this heavyweight champion ruled the entire continent, from the blinding blizzards of the extreme north down to the slightly milder southern frontiers. The sheer force of its existence bullied the geography into new shapes. So when it finally vanished into the shadows of history, it ripped a massive, unfillable hole right out of the ancient ecosystem's heart. But in a tragic, mysterious finale, a deadly combo of wildly swinging climates and the sudden, lethal invasion of human hunters brought this legend's epic run to a close. Now, brace yourself for the Shasta ground sloth, because let us be real, the Ice Age was not just one endless globe of ice and snow. Down in the brutal, sun-scorched badlands of the ancient American Southwest, where savage deserts crash into endless skies and jagged rock spires stand like ancient sentinels, a lone survivor trekked the deadly cliffs, breaking every rule in the paleontology playbook. Welcome to the thrilling, untold saga of this rugged desert wanderer. As one of the final hulking giants to ever stomp across North America, this creature was a total, walking mystery wrapped in thick fur. Clocking in at almost 9 feet from nose to tail and packing roughly 550 pounds of pure muscle, it threw standard survival tactics right out the window. Instead of duking it out on the wide-open prairies like its mega-sized cousins, this rogue explorer conquered the absolute worst terrain, treacherous cliff faces, jagged plateaus, and deep, mysterious cavern fortresses. While the snow-dwelling titans ruled the frozen pines, this undisputed king of the canyons owned the harshest, most jagged battlegrounds on Earth. Imagine looking at those wicked, hook-like claws, originally built for tearing through roots and ripping up brush, suddenly becoming the ultimate rock climbing gear. With sheer, terrifying focus, this beast locked onto jagged cliff faces, hoisting its massive body up with incredibly powerful, long arms, conquering vertical drops that would send any other creature plunging to its doom. This wild ability let it claim an extreme, unforgiving world totally for itself. By scaling these massive stone walls and bunkering down in high-altitude caverns, the Nothrotheriopsis totally outsmarted the nightmare fuel roaming below like savage saber-toothed cats and giant short-faced bears, while scoring an absolutely perfect hideout against the brutal, freezing desert nights. Scaling those treacherous peaks was absolutely worth it, because those dark, hard-to-reach caves transformed into impenetrable fortresses of peace. But listen, this was not just a place to hide from the monsters outside. It was essentially a prehistoric climate-controlled vault, keeping the air perfectly cool and locking in enough moisture to keep their plant-based stash completely fresh. We literally know exactly what they munched on, all thanks to coprolites, ancient fossilized dung that serves as a wild time capsule for their daily menu. They were chomping down on tough, spiky agave, rugged yucca, and the kind of hardcore, drought-proof greenery that would destroy a normal stomach. Hauling groceries up a cliff and caching them in a secret rock fortress? That is next-level survival genius for a giant plant-eater from the Ice Age. Picture this. It is pitch blackout. The sloth is tucked into a rocky hollow, inhaling the crisp, quiet cavern breeze, while just outside, violent desert winds are absolutely screaming, tearing across the razor-sharp cliffs. Ancient footprints and deep claw marks scraped into the stone prove these beasts used the exact same hideouts for countless generations. Those caverns were the ultimate ancestral strongholds, serving as permanent anchors in a chaotic, shifting world, following a hidden map woven into their very DNA, driven entirely by instinct and ancient memory. Watching them scale those lethal heights would have felt almost like watching a sacred, ancient ritual. No panic, just pure focus. It would test every single rock with its massive front arms, pulling itself up with agonizingly slow, calculated power. There was absolutely no rushing this, just icy, calculated precision. Like some prehistoric monk, it climbed the very walls of time itself, always chasing that ultimate sanctuary from the horrors below. The Nothrotheriopsis held the line until roughly 11,000 years ago, standing right on the apocalyptic edge of the last ice age. They survived earth-shattering changes, but then came the ultimate double threat, completely unpredictable climate shifts and the terrifying sudden arrival of hunters. Those impenetrable mountain fortresses, they tragically turned into permanent stone graves. Paleontologists have uncovered countless skeletons frozen in peace, looking like they just drifted off to sleep. Fast forward to today, and if you venture deep into the dark caves of the Grand Canyon, Nevada, or Arizona, those ancient remains are still incredibly intact. We aren't just talking about dusty bones either. We are looking at perfectly preserved hair, ancient droppings, and actual pieces of tough, leathery skin. It is a mind-blowing, perfectly frozen record of an incredibly smart and cautious survivor, turning every single cavern into a literal time machine. Every groove in those rocks whispers the epic saga of a beast that defied gravity and predatory monsters just to stay alive. The wild story of this giant shows us that winning the evolutionary lottery is not always about being the fastest or the most vicious. Sometimes, it is all about that stealthy grind, knowing exactly when to lay low, when to make a move, and how to conquer the unscalable. It is a brilliant reminder that absolute patience and rock-solid caution can outlast sheer brute force. Now, cue the boss music for the undisputed king of the ground sloths, Megatherium americanum, towering over 19.5 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs and tipping the scales at a staggering 13,200 pounds. This absolute unit was a genuine titan among ancient plant eaters. Do not picture an oversized version of the sleepy guys hanging in trees today. This was a walking, breathing, natural disaster, a creature so massive it could completely bulldoze and reconstruct entire environments just by existing. An absolute masterpiece of ancient evolution. It dominated the prehistoric landscapes of South America, totally ruling over what we now call Argentina, Uruguay, and heavy chunks of Brazil. These colossal titans swaggered with a deeply terrifying, unshakable confidence across sprawling savannas, wide-open ancient forests, and muddy, untamed riverbanks. Built like a prehistoric tank, its massive, tree-trunk legs anchored a ridiculously muscular frame, while those giant, scythe-like front claws could literally rip young trees completely out of the dirt with deadly, surgical tools. Forget every single stereotype you have about slow, lazy sloths. This beast covered serious ground. Sure, it was not sprinting, but its march was completely unstoppable. Add in that sheer, earth-shattering strength, and you have an animal that was practically untouchable by the nightmare predators of its time. Thanks to a massively reinforced spine, it could easily thrust itself backward onto its colossal back legs and thick tail, locking into an unshakable three-point stance to strip the highest branches clean. Or, if things got really desperate, unleash absolute hell on attackers using those nightmare-inducing claws. While it mostly fueled that huge body with a peaceful diet of leaves, fruit, and tough bark, there are wild clues hinting that when the Ice Age threw a brutal famine its way, it might have actually gone rogue, scavenging dead meat just to survive. Scientists are still locked in an intense debate over whether this gentle giant had a dark, carnivorous side, but one thing is absolutely indisputable. Its heavy-duty jaws and rock-crushing teeth were the ultimate machines for totally obliterating the toughest, most fibrous prehistoric plants. And while its skull looked comically tiny sitting on top of that mountain of muscle, inside was a highly capable brain, giving this unbelievable survivor the exact street smarts it needed to rule a vicious, forgotten world. Every waking second was a life-or-death calculation, scanning the hostile horizon for hidden dangers, picking the safest paths to trek, and sniffing out whatever calorie-rich plants could sustain its massive frame. Thanks to those front-facing eyes, it locked onto its environment with killer depth perception. Absolutely vital when you are bulldozing through tangled primordial jungles and treacherous terrain. And get this, the mighty Megatherium probably was not just a lone wanderer. Just like the massive plant eaters we see today, these beasts likely banded together in tight-knit family squads to watch each other's backs. Picture a crew of these colossal titans marching side by side, literally trampling massive highways into the prehistoric plains as they gathered around watering holes and the richest feeding grounds. When the brutal dry season hit, they did not just sit around, they embarked on epic, grueling migrations that spanned impossible distances. With every slow, thunderous footstep, this unstoppable force of nature completely reshaped the very plant life of the earth they walked upon. Fast forward to the sweeping Argentine pampas, where explorers in the 18th century stumbled upon something absolutely mind-blowing. Nearly flawless, complete skeletons of these forgotten monsters. These bones sent such shockwaves through the scientific world that Georges Cuvier himself, the legendary founding father of modern paleontology, had to get his hands on them. And right then and there, the terrifying concept that entire species could simply be wiped off the face of the earth finally became undisputed scientific fact, all thanks to the Megatherium sparking this massive intellectual uprising. But here's where the story gets really wild. These behemoths actually crossed paths with the very first human hunters in South America. Chilling cut marks on fossilized bones and scattered stone weaponry tell a brutal tale. These enormous titans were actively hunted down by highly organized, fearless human tribes. Just pause for a second and picture that nightmare. A small crew of humans, armed with nothing but rocks tied to sticks, staring down an enraged, elephant-sized behemoth. Absolute chills. However, the sudden vanishing of the Megatherium roughly 10,000 years ago is a haunting cold case that still baffles experts today. It was a brutal triple threat that doomed them. Wild climate shifts, disappearing food, and the relentless pressure of human hunters. The harsh, melting post-glacial world simply turned its back on them. Thick, suffocating forests swallowed up the wide-open savannas, totally wiping out the perfect battleground where this colossal plant-eater once thrived. Flash forward to today, and these towering, ghostly skeletons still absolutely command the silent halls of museums around the globe. Crowds of kids and adults alike stand there with their jaws on the floor, mesmerized by the downright bizarre and sheer, terrifying scale of the Megatherium, trying to wrap their heads around a savage, lost era, where a simple sloth grew far more monstrous and heavily built than a raging bull. Enter the Mylodon darwini. Think of a hulking, tank-like monster, swathed in impossibly thick fur, armed with terrifying, scythe-like claws that could effortlessly shred solid tree trunks and rip the very ground apart. That absolute unit was the Mylodon darwini, the legendary Mylodon, a massive, long-lost titan that once ruled the untamed, frozen landscapes of deep South America like an absolute king. To uncover the dark secrets of this beast, we have to journey to the edge of the world, down to the breathtaking Cueva del Milodon in the deep south of Chile, just outside Puerto Natales. Plunging over 650 feet into the earth, this cavernous abyss guards one of the most mind-blowing fossil jackpots in all of South American history. We are talking about actual fossilized skin that still has clumps of real fur and tough tissue clinging to it. It was so freakishly fresh and perfectly preserved that for decades, it ignited a wild, heart-pounding rumor that the Mylodon was actually still out there, lurking alive, and breathing deep within those impenetrable southern forests. This legendary hideout was first busted open back in the late 19th century by the daring explorer Hermann Eberhard, a German pioneer who literally tripped over the hairy remains entirely by accident while trekking through the wild. And man, that news exploded across the globe. Elite scientists from every corner of the planet flocked to the site, absolutely floored by how incredibly intact the beast was. It looked so real that brilliant minds genuinely argued this giant had survived the Ice Age and lived right up until modern human history, believing it walked side by side, or even battled, with the very first indigenous tribes of the region. But make no mistake, the Mylodon was a true child of the Pleistocene, a brutal epoch ruled by walking mountains of meat, crushing glaciers, and violent, world-ending weather shifts. It stomped across the rugged terrain we now know as Patagonia, somewhere between 13,000 and 10,000 years ago. Now, that might sound like an eternity to you and me, but in the grand timeline of our planet, it is practically yesterday. There is a massive chance these monsters locked eyes with the first brave humans to conquer the southern tip of the continent, and that totally rewrites the survival playbook. Just looking at the biological blueprint of the Mylodon proves exactly how ruthless and clever prehistoric nature could be. It rocked a terrifyingly jacked physique, reinforced by thick, armor-like bones, specifically engineered to haul around its crushing, colossal bulk. Those front arms were literally weaponized with vicious, scythe-curved claws, perfect for tearing deep into the frozen earth for roots or violently ripping down thick brush. Forget those sleepy modern sloths hanging upside down in the canopy. The Mylodon was a beast of the earth, an absolute ground-pounding tank that stood firm, unbreakable, and totally fearless. Its skull was a masterpiece of specialized hardware. Sure, it did not have sharp incisors or fangs, but its teeth were grinding machines, built to effortlessly pulverize the toughest, most stubborn plants out there. Armed with an insanely powerful lower jaw and a rock-hard palate, it could easily chew through the harsh, wiry vegetation that dominated the freezing, unforgiving grasslands it called home. This beast was built for one thing, absolute survival. But even Mother Nature's ultimate design could not hold out when the world started burning up and a new, two-legged predator hit the scene. Now, picture this. The Mylodon was not wandering those brutal, ice-choked southern badlands solo. It was locked in a prehistoric turf war with South America's most legendary monsters, vicious saber-toothed cats, heavily armored glyptodonts, massive toxodons, and the very first wild horses. We are talking about an era of absolute titans, where every single day was a blood-pumping struggle just to see tomorrow. Then, the ultimate plot twist hit. The ice started melting. Those endless frozen plains exploded into suffocating, tangled jungles, and those magnificent, towering plant eaters, they slowly faded into absolute extinction. Enter the Glossotherium robustum. Picture a towering behemoth, stretching 13 feet long and tipping the scales at well over 2,200 pounds. This absolute unit was one of the most colossal ground sloths to ever walk the earth. Packed with unbreakable bones, explosive muscle, and claws like medieval scythes, it was a walking tank. Sure, it chewed leaves, but this juggernaut stalked the primal landscapes of modern-day Argentina, Uruguay, and southern Brazil with a terrifying, untouchable swagger. Just looking at its massive skull tells you one thing: this monster could crush practically anything between its jaws. Its heavy-duty jaw hinges worked like industrial meat grinders, relentlessly shredding the absolute toughest prehistoric vegetation out there. It did not even need front teeth. It rocked a set of brutal, ever-growing molars that stayed razor-sharp from birth until its dying breath. Its massive, hypersensitive snout was essentially a biological metal detector, perfectly designed to rip up the frozen earth and hunt down deeply buried roots. But here is where it gets crazy. Check out that massive, hollowed-out nasal cavity. Scientists believe this brute actually rocked a mini-trunk, kind of like a wild tapir or a prehistoric elephant. That fierce little upgrade made it a totally unstoppable feeding machine. Imagine this: it rears up on its back legs, using a tail built like a steel girder to prop itself up, just to rip entire branches straight out of the sky. Going bipedal meant nothing was out of reach. This giant was practically the undisputed king of the canopy. Out there in the savage Pleistocene wilds, it went toe-to-toe with apex nightmares, ferocious saber-toothed assassins, armored glyptodonts, heavy-hitting toxodons, and gargantuan mastodons. It was a literal clash of the titans, an epic ecosystem balanced on the razor's edge of sheer, earth-shaking brute force. Now, it was not a meat-eater, but do not let that fool you. It was a silent powerhouse, completely terraforming the brutal landscape every time its massive foot hit the dirt. But being huge did not mean it was invincible. Lethal killers like the legendary Smilodon were always lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to tear into a sick or wandering calf. But getting a kill was not easy. This beast was literally wrapped in chainmail. Thick, bulging muscles covered in tiny bone plates gave it a suit of biological armor. These gnarly bone chunks, called osteoderms, were buried right inside its flesh, making it just as bulletproof as a gigantic armadillo. Seeing armor on a sloth is completely mind-blowing, and it just proves how hardcore this era was. The brutal environment literally forced these giants to mutate into walking fortresses just to survive the carnage. There was a catch, though. They did not breed fast. Mothers carried their babies for an eternity, barely popping out a few young during their entire lifespan. Classic megafauna problems. They played the long game, banking on unshakable stability instead of flooding the primal plains with babies. But as we all know, Mother Nature loves chaos. 10,000 years ago, the ice started to shatter, and the warning signs were flashing everywhere. The world caught fire. The deep freeze melted, the land warped, and a terrifying new apex predator humans started flooding the zone, completely swarming the South American continent. Then there is Paramylodon harlani. Picture a wild, untamed planet totally alien to the one we know today, with endless, howling plains stretching into infinity, and dark, suffocating jungles, hiding unimaginable beasts, and in the middle of it all stood an absolute legend. A phantom of the Ice Age, completely wiped out thousands of years ago, but still screaming its story from the fossilized bones we keep digging out of the dirt. Paramylodon harlani. This magnificent brute was part of the ultimate heavyweight division, the giant ground sloths of the Mylodonidae family. This monster dominated the entire American landscape throughout the heart-stopping Pleistocene epoch, an insane stretch of time kicking off roughly 2.6 million years back, right up until the icy curtain fell around 11,000 years ago. Its awesome name is a shout-out to Richard Harlan, one of the original trailblazing bone hunters who cracked the code of North American paleontology. But listen, Paramylodon was not your average sleepy tree hugger. Clocking in at almost 10 feet long and crushing the scales at over 2,200 pounds, it prowled on 4 legs until it decided to show its true power. It would blast upward onto its back legs, flexing insanely jacked arms and swinging nightmare claws just to shred the highest, most out-of-reach foliage. With a frame built like a living tank and bones as thick as tree trunks, this absolute powerhouse completely dominated the ancient North American plains. But here is the wild part. For all that terrifying bulk, it was basically a gentle giant that just wanted to munch on leaves, twigs, and wild fruit. We have actually unearthed the remains of the mighty Pteranodon, scattered all over the United States, though the most mind-blowing hauls were dragged straight out of the sticky, bubbling tar of the La Brea pits in Los Angeles, California. That deadly natural asphalt acted like a prehistoric time capsule, trapping these beasts and preserving their entire skeletons to give us an insanely clear look into a forgotten world. Digging into those bones unlocked some seriously epic secrets about how these titans fought to survive, how they moved, and exactly what they ate. Now, wipe your mind of those tiny, sleepy sloths hanging around today. You will not find this beast dangling from a branch in slow motion. Paramylodon was a ground-stomping behemoth of mammoth proportions. It rocked massively, thick arms tipped with lethal scythe, like claws perfect for ripping through heavy brush. Or, slashing at anything foolish enough to attack it. Inside its jaws, it lacked normal enamel entirely, relying instead on solid dentin, a brilliant evolutionary trick that let its teeth constantly regrow as it ground down rough, gritty plants day in and day out. Even crazier? Science shows this monster practically wore a suit of armor, wrapping itself in ridiculously thick hide packed with rock-hard bone pebbles, called osteoderms, literally turning its body into a walking fortress. And trust me, it needed that shield. North America back then was a brutal battleground, stalked by absolute nightmares like the vicious saber-toothed cat and the towering short-faced bear. So, what wiped this invincible juggernaut off the face of the earth? Well, like most prehistoric cold cases, it is a massive, unsolved mystery. A huge piece of the puzzle definitely points toward the extreme, violent climate shifts that completely shattered the Ice Age world. Once the planet started heating up, the massive sloth watched its home vanish right before its eyes, turning everyday survival into an agonizing struggle. Toss in the arrival of a brand new, highly intelligent apex predator humans, and things get even darker. Paleo-Indian tribes crashed into the Americas around 15,000 years ago, and the ruins they left behind proved they were absolutely fearless hunters of megafauna. We might not have smoking gun proof of a full-blown sloth slaughter, but dodging spears while your entire ecosystem burns down is a lethal combination for any species. Chemical breakdowns of ancient bones show that this beast was a hardcore survivor, capable of eating pretty much any plant it stumbled across. That flexibility meant it could conquer totally different battlegrounds, from sprawling forests to brutally dry and unforgiving deserts. But even that incredible willpower to adapt was nowhere near enough to cheat death when the entire world order flipped upside down at the violent close of Cross. The Pleistocene epoch. Close your eyes for a second. Picture a totally frozen wasteland choked by towering glaciers, where razor-sharp winds scream across dead plains beneath an endlessly bleak, gray sky. Out of this absolute meat grinder of an environment stepped the most awe-inspiring plant eaters the Earth has ever witnessed. We are not just talking big, we are talking jaw-dropping, earth-shaking magnificence. Right now, we are ripping a hole in time, diving tens of thousands of years backward to stand face-to-face with the stoic royalty of the frozen world. Jump over to the absolutely brutal wastelands of Australia, roughly 40,000 years ago, where an unstoppable titan lumbered through freezing grass and ancient eucalyptus groves. This was an era of pure, unforgiving extremes, a terrifying landscape carved out by bitter cold and brutal starvation. And right in the middle of nature's savage arena, an absolute freak of epic proportions stamped its authority. Meet the Diprotodon, the undisputed heavyweight champion of all marsupials. Seriously, just picture a fluffy wombat pumped up to the size of a full-blown sport utility vehicle, stretching almost 13 feet long and crushing the scales at over 4,400 pounds. This beast commanded instant respect every time it took a step. Wrapped in a massively thick coat of shaggy fur, it was practically bulletproof against the howling ice storms and bone-chilling nights of the deep freeze. With its massive, blunt nose and tiny, focused eyes, it locked onto its surroundings, acting like a living bulldozer as it sniffed out hidden roots and tough greenery. Survival for this Goliath meant never stopping an endless, grueling march for calories across the punishing, dusty outback of Pleistocene Australia. Teaming up into tight-knit squads, these gigantic grazers patrolled the wild timberlands and open steppes, shredding the dirt with jackhammer like front legs to strike gold-rich, juicy tubers, and literally vacuuming up forests of greens just to keep their massive engines running. Sticking together was their ultimate survival hack, forming a wall of muscle against bloodthirsty predators while making scavenging way more effective. Still, the reality was incredibly brutal. Even though the deep freeze did not hit Australia quite as hard as the rest of the globe, the sudden, violent climate shocks were downright apocalyptic, totally mutating the terrain, sucking rivers dry, and absolutely deleting entire forest ecosystems from existence. The world was violently shifting, and the massive Diprotodon had one brutal choice: adapt on the fly or die out. Staying put simply wasn't an option anymore. They had to keep moving. Picture these colossal herds marching for hundreds of miles, driven by a deep, primal instinct. They were chasing the fading echoes of ancestral trails, desperate to find untouched grazing lands, reliable watering holes, and just a sliver of hope. It was an epic showdown, the ultimate clash between biological willpower and a doomed destiny. Now, you'd think this lumbering giant was a powerhouse, but it wasn't the one doing the hunting. It was on the menu, quiet, relentless, built to endure the terrifying threats lurking in the shadows. Their survival toolkit? Basically just their sheer bulk, armor-like skin, and sticking together in a herd. But then, a terrifying new breed of hunter stepped onto the scene, shattering those ancient defenses. While the savage climate ripped the landscape apart, a brand new apex predator crashed the Australian ecosystem. Us. Humans. Roughly 50,000 years back, the very first groups of Homo sapiens braved treacherous oceans to stake their claim on the shores of modern-day Australia. They weren't just hungry, they were dangerously smart. Highly coordinated hunting squads armed with lethal tools and the devastating power of fire. Fueled by a relentless will to conquer the elements, these newcomers were about to completely obliterate the future of the Ice Age megafauna. Let's jump to the absolute nightmare of the Siberian wasteland. Deep in that unforgiving, bone-chilling white desert, an absolute tank of a beast pounded the frozen earth with thunderous footsteps. Imagine a modern rhinoceros, but massively upgraded on steroids, sporting a colossal, spear-like weapon erupting right out of its skull. This absolute unit of the tundra earned a legendary title, the Siberian unicorn, scientifically known as Elasmotherium sibericum. For centuries, we brushed off unicorns as nothing more than fairy tale magic and campfire myths. But fossil records hit us with a reality check. Nature actually engineered its own brutally real version. Forget the delicate, sparkling horses of fantasy lore. This thing was a nightmare. We are talking about an 8,800-pound wrecking ball stretching almost 13 feet long. You could literally hear it breathing. It was intimidating. A pure, unadulterated force of nature molded by the most violently unforgiving chapter in our planet's history, the Ice Age. Flashback 2.6 million years ago, kicking off the brutal geological epoch we call the Pleistocene. Mother Earth was bipolar back then, swinging wildly between massive, crushing deep freezes and brief, deceptive thaws. The whole world turned into a deadly obstacle course, and it was exactly within this icy hellscape that our rhino-like titan leveled up. Built to laugh in the face of sub-zero temperatures, it rocked a massively thick, shaggy coat and an ultra-efficient internal engine that kept it alive through agonizing famines. But the absolute showstopper? That massive spike on its face. It was a deadly weapon, a vital survival tool, and a terrifying badge of pure prehistoric dominance. Now, here's the wild part. That horn wasn't made of solid bone like some deer. It was pure keratin. Literally the exact same stuff as your fingernails, packed tight into a devastating lance. Growing up to an insane 6 feet long, this natural broadsword was their go-to for settling brutal turf wars. They used it to fight for mates and to violently smash through hard-packed snow just to reach buried plants. It was a multi-tool forged in the fires of an unforgiving wilderness. Despite looking like an armor-plated killer, this titan was strictly a plant eater. It fueled its massive bulk on fibrous tundra grass, tough lichens, and deep roots scattered across the freezing, wind-blasted Asian steppes. Equipped with skull-crushing jaws and heavy-duty teeth, it could demolish the most stubborn vegetation. But unlike the terrifying wolf packs of the era, this giant walked its path completely alone. It drifted across endless miles of cracking ice, steered only by raw gut feelings, and an ancient map burned into its DNA by its forebears. Honestly, we're still piecing together exactly how they interacted with each other in the wild. But the bones tell a story hints that during specific seasons, These loners would converge in chaotic, crowded arenas to kick off mating season. When that time hit, the males didn't hold back. It was an all-out bloodbath of pure aggression. They weaponized those 6-foot horns like heavy lancers, clashing in epic gladiatorial duels, just to win the right to pass on their genes. The sound of those monstrous collisions must have echoed like thunder across the frostbitten valleys, gouging violent trenches into the permafrost. Let's shift gears to the giant moa. This massive member of a flightless bird dynasty completely ruled the prehistoric woodland like an absolute king. Going by the scientific name Dinornis, this wasn't just another bird in the flock. It was a walking, breathing monument of deep time, a survivor from the chaotic fallout after the dinosaurs died off, watching the very continents tear apart. When this feathered giant stretched its neck up, it towered at a terrifying 11.8 feet into the air. And carrying over 550 pounds of sheer muscle, it went down in history as one of the most colossal birds to ever walk the earth. It practically looked like a forgotten prehistoric monster stepping straight out of a thick, ancient fog. The moa's epic origin story kicked off millions of years back, right when New Zealand violently splintered away from the massive supercontinent Gondwana. With zero mammalian predators around to hunt them, the avian kingdom exploded. While some mastered the skies, the moa took a different route. They absolutely dominated the earth. Stranded on their island fortress, they bulked up and mutated over millennia, morphing into the towering, silent guardians of the Pleistocene era. Yet, despite throwing an impossibly large shadow, this colossal titan was just a gentle, leaf-munching pacifist at heart. Picture this towering giant casually stripping foliage, snatching up fruits, and cracking seeds. That ridiculously long neck was the ultimate survival tool, letting it feast on everything from the ground-level brush right up to the middle of the forest canopy. You would think a beast this massive would be incredibly clumsy, but no, it practically glided through the thick, prehistoric jungle without making a single sound. Those heavily muscled legs ended in massive feet equipped with wicked claws, anchoring its colossal bulk no matter how rough the earth got, from treacherous alpine slopes to sinking, muddy bogs. And let me tell you, Ice Age New Zealand was a wild, unforgiving world of absolute extremes. Down by the coast, you had these suffocating damp jungles, but push inland toward the mountains, boom, freezing, brutal wastelands barely clinging to life. The mighty moa did not just survive this climatic whiplash, it conquered it, constantly staying on the move across different elevations just to chase down the next meal. This absolute heavyweight was a master of the wild, perfectly in tune with the deadly rhythm of the changing seasons. Without any big cats or wolves hunting them on the ground, these bird titans only relied on their staggering bulk for protection. But hold your breath, there was one terrifying killer stalking them from above. Enter the Hawk, the absolute undisputed king of the skies. Imagine a flying monster boasting a wingspan stretching nearly 9.8 feet across, packing meat-hook talons that could slice through flesh like butter. This aerial assassin was built from the ground up for one brutal purpose, turning these giant flightless birds into a bloody feast. Trapped on an island at the edge of the world, this was a deadly evolutionary arms race like no other. Down below, the moas stuck together in tight-knit survival squads, mostly just giant mothers fiercely guarding their chicks. The guys? Well, they were downright tiny compared to the females, likely spending their days showing off to win a mate and taking on the dangerous job of keeping those precious eggs warm. Growing a prehistoric giant takes time, and their breeding cycle was painfully sluggish. A mother might only drop a handful of colossal, thick-shelled eggs in her entire life, and despite looking like armor, they were heartbreakingly vulnerable to the unpredictable chaos of the Ice Age. It was a terrifyingly precarious balancing act. Even the slightest shift in their frozen world could spell absolute disaster for the entire species. Now, brace yourself for Megaloceros giganteus. Picture a prehistoric beast swaggering through the frost with an unbelievable rack of antlers stretching over 9.8 feet across. This creature was the literal definition of wild majesty, a gorgeous, mysterious ghost of the prehistoric tundra. Those mind-blowing antlers jutted into the icy air like the bare branches of ancient oaks, dropping jaws but also leaving scientists scratching their heads over how such a bizarre evolutionary gamble even worked or why it ultimately failed. Standing on massive, powerhouse legs, this heavyweight herbivore looked like something ripped straight out of dark fantasy lore. You can not even blame the early folks who dug these colossal bones out of murky bogs and ancient peatlands. They took one look and genuinely believed they had unearthed something supernatural, screaming about the remains of literal underworld demons or fallen giants. And hey, while everyone calls it the Irish elk, this titan definitely did not just hang out in Ireland. This relentless survivor stomped its way across the entire frozen map of Eurasia, leaving bones everywhere from the bitter chills of Siberia all the way to the British coastlines. It only got that famous Irish nickname because the acidic, oxygen-starved bogs of Ireland acted like nature's perfect freezer, keeping these magnificent skeletons perfectly intact for millennia. But its epic saga stretches way beyond those emerald shores, rooted deep in a hardcore family tree of deer that absolutely ruled the savage Pleistocene epoch. Paleontologists reckon this absolute unit crashed onto the scene roughly 400,000 years ago. And for a massive chunk of that prehistoric timeline, it was locked in a daily battle for its life against the ultimate nightmares. Think razor-fanged, saber-toothed cats and monstrous cave lions, all while fighting shoulder to shoulder for scraps of food against towering mammoths and armored woolly rhinos. But amidst all that Ice Age chaos, its absolute claim to fame was that outrageous, colossal headgear. It is the kind of wild evolutionary flex that still has modern bone hunters and biologists staring in absolute awe. Seriously, what kind of evolutionary madness drives a creature to lug around a small car's worth of bone right on top of its skull? Rebuilding these massive crowns from scratch every single year drained insane levels of calcium and phosphorus from their bodies, turning soft tissue into rock-hard weaponry. Pumping out that kind of bone meant burning massive calories, and just walking around required neck muscles of steel. Yet, year after grueling year, the males proudly hoisted these literal crowns of survival. The scientific consensus? It all boils down to the prehistoric dating game survival of the most impressive. When breeding season hit, the frozen steppes turned into a gladiator arena where these beasts locked horns in brutal, earth-shaking clashes, using their headgear to scream power and dominance. If a male stepped up, rocking the widest, most perfectly balanced, and visually jaw-dropping rack, he was the undisputed king of the herd, winning the ultimate right to breed. But here is the tragic twist. That exact same badge of honor likely paved their road to oblivion. Imagine trying to sprint for your life through a dense, tangled forest with a massive net of bone strapped to your face. It was an absolute death trap. When the brutal Pleistocene winters finally broke, the endless, open grasslands began choking with thick, overgrown woodlands. Suddenly, our majestic giant was trapped in a brand new world it just was not built for. And as if the environment betraying them was not enough, an incredibly cunning, ruthless new hunter entered the chat: early humans. These highly coordinated, intelligent predators absolutely took advantage of the desperate situation. They knew this titanic deer could not maneuver in tight spaces, easily cornering the magnificent beasts in sticky bogs or trapping them against sheer, unforgiving cliffsides. Dig sites have unearthed the smoking guns of these ancient encounters, proving mankind actively hunted these majestic giants down. They did not just eat them. They transformed those legendary antlers into vital survival tools and sacred jewelry. But the bond between early man and the Megaloceros went way deeper than just predator and prey. Deep inside legendary French cave systems like Chauvet and Lascaux, you can still find awe-inspiring, ancient murals showcasing massive, heavily antlered deer leaping across the rock walls. We cannot say with 100% certainty that these shadow-drenched paintings are exact portraits of the Megaloceros, but the sheer majesty frozen in those strokes leaves us breathless, wandering through the forgotten magic of the Ice Age. There is absolutely no doubt that when our ancestors locked eyes with these colossal beasts, their hearts pounded with a primal mix of raw terror and absolute reverence. And honestly, our modern obsession with these monsters is just as fierce. Ever since the 1800s, bone hunters and scientists have ruthlessly battled to unearth the complete remains of the mighty Megaloceros, dragging these titans into the spotlight of our grandest museums. They piece together these shattered relics, almost praying the magic of the Ice Age will spark them back to life. Standing in those hushed, dimly lit halls, man, the skeletal ghost of the Megaloceros simply demands our ultimate respect. Those impossibly massive antlers, even stripped down to bare bone, completely shatter everything we thought we knew about the absolute limits of nature. For decades, brilliant minds have wrestled with the ultimate mystery. What exactly wiped out the mighty Megaloceros? Was it a brutally shifting climate, relentless human hunters, or a savage starvation from dying landscapes? Every single theory just plunges us deeper into the unknown.